9, 12, 10, 28, 2, 23.
This is the DSR Podcast. Hello, welcome to DSR's Words Matter. For those of you who are looking for Words Matter, this is the place. For those of you looking for DSR's Thursday pod on politics, this is the place. A few times in the past, we've merged the two, and there was a good response. So we're going to just keep doing it. That's a pleasure for me because it means that each and every week I can have a nice therapy session with my friend, the brilliant Norm Ornstein. How are you doing today, Norm?
Well, I've had better days and weeks, David, but we should tell our listeners that the reason we're doing this is that the Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, said it would be far more efficient to merge the two podcasts.
Yes, and we would do whatever they said.
I
know you're a big fan of theirs.
I have to tell you, David, I started out relatively chipper in the morning. And then I saw, I just turned on CNN just to see if there were any new developments. And I saw a Texas congressman named Gill, who others later told me is Dinesh D'Souza's son-in-law, which would explain it, lying through his teeth over and over again about Elon Musk and his minions, saying that they were all government employees with top security clearances, which is utterly false. You don't get to be a government employee just by having somebody say you are a government employee, and you do not get to have a security clearance just by having Elon Musk himself not with the security clearance, saying I have a security clearance, much less if the president just says you have a security clearance. There's a process, and the processes are being violated. But what just put me in a foul mood was that this radical, lunatic, right-wing liar is all too typical of what we're seeing. And to the credit of the CNN host, she kept saying, well, tell me, if this were George Soros going in and bringing in a bunch of his friends to go into computer systems in the government, take out sensitive information, and begin to chop out duly appropriated funds, how would you feel? And of course, he refused to answer that. So now, the other piece of news today that set me off a little bit more was the now fired Coast Guard commander, a woman fired basically because she's a woman, and who was in a government sponsored house, but was given 60 days by the Coast Guard to get out of the house. She's no longer the commandant. And then was told by Trump thugs, you have 3 hours to leave your house. Now imagine, people who are watching us can see our fully furnished houses with bookshelves and mementos and everything else, much less the furniture and all the rest of our possessions, being told that you've got 3 hours to leave. So the meanness, the vileness of what all of these people are doing, not to mention the illegality of it, takes me away from having a good day. Let's put it that way.
Well, that's why we're doing this podcast,
Yep.
Norm. It's so that you can express yourselves, vent, get it out of your system. I am afraid that with regard to Musk and his minions, this president has long said that he's going to give people security clearances, by fiat, effectively, without any background process. And of course, nobody can stop him from doing that. And it seems like, it's compounded by the fact that everybody in the government who is a political appointee, and the leadership in the Congress aren't going to stop them. And so they're going to keep doing this. One of the things I saw today, which adds to the uh, gravity of what you're saying, is that apparently one of these Musk guys went into Treasury and said, "Okay, well, which of these codes, like which button do I have to hit to shut off USAID? Which of the codes?"
Yep.
And that, of course, is why they're in there. They're in there to stop payments, to stop the government from working, without any sort of concern for the law. And it's a little bit like Elon Musk might have done if he'd taken over a company. He'd go in and he would go to the CFO's office and he'd make a bunch of changes. But of course, it doesn't work that way in the U.S. government. Now, that gets me to what I really was hoping we could talk about today.
Yeah.
And that is, not how do we feel about it? Not that I don't care how you feel. I care a lot. But what do we do about it? What does anybody do about it? And you and I had lunch yesterday, and we were talking about this. And you wrote a terrific Substack column for the Contrarian about what the Congress can do about this, because it sure does seem like, to the casual observer, that the Democrats in the Congress, the opposition party, are for the most part asleep at the switch. Now, some of the, like there was a vote yesterday about subpoenaing Musk, and there were a couple of Democrats who didn't even show up for it. And then had they shown up, he would have been subpoenaed. Well, or at least, the vote would have gone that way. We'd have to see whether anybody ever acted on that, whether he'd show up. But I just thought it would be really good for people to hear your suggestions, because you are the leading expert on how the Congress works, as to what the Democrats conceivably could do to gum up the work, stop things from happening, hit the brakes the way the Republicans always do.
So let me start with one thing I didn't mention in the column, and yours that followed was terrific as well, with some ideas. But I saw a little bit before we came on that among those, and your comments about AID triggered this for me, among those devastated by stopping AID in its tracks are Catholic Relief Services. And Musk has put a direct target on Lutheran relief. But let's start with Catholic Relief Services. And my initial comment was, all right, let's see what Cardinal Dolan has to say about this. The top Catholic religious leaders in the country, at least many of them, led by New York's Cardinal Dolan, have kissed Trump's ring over and over again. And one of the things that we all have to do is to shame those who are staying silent in the face of these depredations. So I would call out Cardinal Dolan, and I would also call out George W. Bush. You look at PEPFAR, his biggest accomplishment as president, stopped in its tracks by Trump, not word one from George W. Bush. It's not that they're going to stop with their protests, anything. But when people stay silent in the face of autocratic, tyrannical actions, people who have at least some standing in the society, it just makes it so much easier to go forward with them. At least some people who wouldn't know about this or who take their cues from other opinion leaders would pay attention if people like Dolan and Bush stood up and said, this is outrageous and wrong, and it's damaging to the American national interest, to the American psyche, to every standard of decency. So with that out of the way, you're absolutely right about Democrats who in the past have treated everything that's going on, with the exception of pounding a table and shaking a fist and sometimes holding a rally, treated it as if it's just business as usual. They're in the minority, but inside each house, there are ways in which you can make a difference and have an impact and at bare minimum, rally more constituents, but also create significant speed bumps in the way as these people do what Steve Bannon had said they should do, move with muzzle velocity to overwhelm everybody with these outrageous actions. So let's start with the Senate. And here we have a whole bunch of things in the toolbox that Republicans have used repeatedly in the past, but that we know are there. You can delay proceedings. You can soak up floor time. You can make it harder for them to achieve any legislative accomplishment. You can force them to be around, almost around the clock, in times and in places they don't want to be, to go through all the hoops that are necessary to confirm judges and executive appointees, and along the way probably stop some of them. Even though the threshold for these nominations and confirmations is a simple majority, it doesn't mean they're not subject to filibuster, which means you're going to have to take a lot of time. And they're now doing it for show in the Senate. Almost certainly, they're not going to block Russell Vought from becoming the head of the Office of Management and Budget, the architect of Project 2025, a radical right-wing lunatic who also happens to be very smart, who previously served as the head of OMB in the first Trump administration, overreached his authority and lied about it. And now they're going round the clock, and every Democrat in the Senate is coming in for a time and speaking about it, and all talking about how they're going to oppose it. They will not prevail any more than they will prevail with Tulsi Gabbard or with Robert F. Kennedy Jr. But the more you can soak up time, the more you can highlight why these people are unacceptable for office, the better off you are. And along with that, most of the people who are listening to us or watching us, almost by definition, have a level of interest and sophistication about what's going on. We can all remember Tommy Tuberville putting blanket holds on every military promotion for what became months because he didn't like the fact that women in the military serving on a base in a state that wouldn't allow abortion were given the ability to travel to another state that would, just so they wouldn't be simply suffering only because they were following orders to begin with. But we also know that Josh Hawley, Tom Cotton, Rand Paul all put blanket holds on nominees for departments because of their own grievances. Now, all a hold does, it's an informal sort of thing, is a senator basically says, I will deny unanimous consent on this confirmation going forward. In general, the Senate, under both parties, has honored those holds. And that can mean months or years. I'll give you, frankly, to me, the most notorious individual one was back when Obama was president. He nominated Cassandra Butts, a very qualified individual, to be ambassador to the Bahamas. And Tom Cotton put a hold on that lasted for a year and a half until, as she waited twisting in the wind for her confirmation vote, she died of cancer. And Cotton later said he did it because he didn't like Obama. Just a vile act by a vile person. But, Democrats swallowed hard and held to it. They can do this now. And if the Republicans say, okay, we're not going to do that anymore, they're still going to have to take time on individual confirmations, time before a cloture motion can ripen, time for debate, the cloture motion itself, 30 hours of post-cloture debate, which is what they're doing now on the Russell Vought confirmation. And there are hundreds, thousands actually, of nominations to go forward. And we know it's just as bad at these lower levels, the assistant secretaries of departments, because once they're confirmed, you can use the Vacancies Act to put them into top positions. Trump would sneak in a few at lower levels for just that purpose. Hold them all up. Hold up every judge. We have another informal thing called the blue slip. The blue slip, which has been around also for many decades, basically served as a check on presidential power in the past. And it is that senators from a state where there is a court nominee, a judicial nominee, district court, now usually appeals court, from that state, they will not move forward with a nomination if those state senators, either of them, object. Now, that's been misused in the past. Democrats have kept it, and Republicans used it to basically just keep vacancies in courts. Dick Durbin, when he was still chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee before the last election, said, we should preserve this because we don't know who's going to win. And if we do away from it, they'll do away from it. Maybe they will. Now's the time to use it over and over to block bad nominees. And if they get rid of it at some point in the future, you will be able to use that precedent. But even without that, you will show that they are being hypocrites to the nth degree. Beyond that, Senate has a rule that you cannot have committees in session for much of the time that the Senate is in session. Every day, they just routinely waive that by unanimous consent, deny it, force them not to be able to hold hearings when the Senate is doing other business, which would make it even harder for them to confirm nominees or to do anything else. Every day when the Senate convenes, there is a rule that says you have to read the journal of the previous day's proceedings. It's routinely waived. They just ignore it or do a brief précis. Don't give it unanimous consent. Make them take an hour or two or more to read it. The same with bills. Senate Rule 14 says that before a bill can move forward, it has to be read, presumably in full, 3 separate times. Many of these bills are hundreds of pages long, routinely waived. Don't waive it. Make them read it. It could take hours, if not days, to go through the most significant bills. So use every delaying tactic possible. In the House, we have other things. It's harder, but the House also has this razor thin margin. And even though the rules that Republicans put in place this year don't mean that if somehow with 215 votes in the House, Democrats have, Republicans basically at 217, soon will be at 217 with Elise Stefanik moving out of there. They lose 3 people, even temporarily, from injury, illness, or even death. But Republicans have made it impossible for Democrats to remove the speaker. It can only be done in the middle of a session by a Republican vote. But you can use a lot of similar delaying tactics, and nobody stops House Democrats from going on the floor in special orders at the end of the day, in the morning, to hold long colloquies talking about the depredations that Donald Trump, Elon Musk, and his minions are bringing to America, and personalize it by talking about not only their own constituents, but those of Republicans who are being devastated by what they're doing, and then hold field hearings not in their own districts, but in the districts of those Republicans who are vulnerable in a general election. Keep the pressure on. Make sure that we get enough attention paid to this. Because let's face it, David, what we would otherwise hope for, a media shouting from the rooftops with front page above the fold, huge type headlines about illegal and immoral acts going on, are not doing anything of the sort, even if individual reporters are doing very good work. We need opinion leaders to step up to the plate. And so far, I don't see a sign that beyond, a few flashy acts like staying in all night to symbolically oppose Russell Vogt, I don't see them doing everything that they can do to bring the place as close to a halt as they can, to show the American people that they're taking this seriously.
Yeah, and of course, in the past, as you noted, a time and time and time again, the Republicans used every tool that they could to be
Yeah.
obstructive. And we remember times when Ted Cruz or Rand Paul would block 50 State Department nominees at a time.
Yeah.
And there was no way to get around them unless they removed the hold that they put on it. We remember the time that Mitch McConnell blocked for a year the nomination of Merrick Garland to become justice on the Supreme Court. But we don't see the Democrats doing this. Now, one of the things, of course, that could happen is the Democrats could say, we're going to do this. And the Republicans could say, well, this is just a tradition. It's not a law. And we're going to blow it up. Tell me why that's not a terrible thing.
Most of what they're going to do, they're going to be able to do in the end. And whether they do it by passing a lot of legislation, and I can tell you that Republicans in the Senate are plenty nervous about blowing all those things up for this reason. They know that their constituents, by and large, are all in on the Trump cult. And they know that their constituents believe a lot of stuff about what government will end up doing that is simply false and that they could suffer for it. So, and they know that the House could well pass completely unpalatable things. And if they don't have the roadblocks in place, the filibuster at all, they may have to go for them instead of having the excuse of blaming Democrats. Put that aside, though. And if they do decide out of frustration that they are going to unilaterally change the rules, say, forget the hold, it's not meaningful to us anymore, although they've still got a problem because the Senate, for many, many decades, long before either you or I were born, which is a very long time.
Yeah,
Um,
that goes back to the first years of our nation.
yeah. They have rules that make it almost impossible to avoid doing things by unanimous consent. But they can change the filibuster rule. They can eliminate it if they're feeling frustrated by it. Is that a bad thing? I've long advocated filibuster reform, and after the election, there were a number of Trumpists who gleefully tweeted at me, "Okay, you wanted to change the rule. Well, how do you feel about it now?" And my feeling is, you know what? If they go ahead, having said this is sacrosanct, you cannot do this, I'm happy to poke a finger at them for hypocrisy. But what I also know is we have one of two outcomes likely down the road. It may take a while, but one outcome is we don't have any more meaningful elections. And if we don't have any more meaningful elections, what they do with the Senate rules won't matter anyhow. Of course, much of it will be done by executive action by a president granted by the awful Chief Justice John Roberts absolute immunity, and no sign that courts, certainly not the High Court, will step in to prevent it. So the impact may not be all that great at this time and in this place. But the second outcome is that at some point, Democrats will recapture power. And if they do, after all these terrible things that have been done, to continue to have a roadblock from being able to undo the awful stuff because rules are in place and you don't have the wherewithal to change them. Let them do away with it so that we can undo the unthinkable, even if it takes years, instead of having to wait those years and then still have nothing.
Yeah, now there are other ways that people can push back. And, we've discussed this on different podcasts here. We did our usual weekly podcast on national security and foreign policy with our friend Rosa Brooks yesterday. And she made the point, look, if you can just throw sand in the works, if you slow things down, it means less damage will be done. So you can do that at multiple levels. There are multiple ways that people can do it. They can give money to lawyers groups that are trying to do it. If they're lawyers, they can do it themselves. If they're lobbyists, they can do it themselves. They can run for office themselves. They can do concrete things. And they can also do things at the local level, because at some point in the not too distant future, if there are elections, what's going to happen? People are going to you know, be um, voting in response to the situation they've lived through. And shutting down these government agencies, shutting down these government programs are going to affect tens of millions of Americans. Ultimately, it'll affect all Americans. People who won't get school lunch programs for their kids, or school buses for disabled kids, or people who won't see infrastructure projects done, or people who will lose their jobs, or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so there's a lot people can do on the local level, just chronicling the cost and the pain that is being inflicted and using that as a springboard for a non-political discussion. Is this good for your neighbors? Is this good for your community? Set aside Democrats and Republicans. People are tired of that stuff. Just ask yourself, are you better off now? Are things getting worse? What can we do about it? And so I think that's good. But at the state and local level, we have governors and mayors. Don't they have a role to play in this?
They certainly do, as do the state attorneys general. The Supreme Court, they may regret this down the road, gave a lot of leeway to states to intervene and get standing for bringing suits against the federal government. And, it's always the excuse that courts use when they don't want to overturn something that one of their partisan people have done, is to deny standing, saying you don't have the right to be intervened in this case. We can have states attorneys generals involved. We need to have mayors standing up to these horrible attempts to seize out of schools and other facilities children, to try and detain and then deport them.
I literally just saw a thing online about Texas edict of seizing kids off of school buses.
We've all seen movies about Nazi Germany, and this is so reminiscent of that. I will tell you that we saw a harbinger of this in the first term, which we heard about from friends of ours. Friendship Heights, this neighborhood right on the border of Washington, D.C. and Chevy Chase, Maryland. Buses stop there, and in the morning, they're filled with individuals, mostly, not exclusively, women, who then walk up to the fancier neighborhoods in Chevy Chase and Bethesda, where they may be babysitting kids, they may be cleaning houses, they may be taking care of the elderly, whatever it may be. And in 2018, there were eyewitness stories of buses pulling up to this main place, and ICE agents waiting to board the buses and go up and down the aisles, look at people they thought were suspicious, and demand their papers. So they've done this before. It was done, of course, by the same monstrous person, Tom Homan, who's now in charge of everything that's going on here. We have reports already of kids who are here legally being seized, pulled out of schools and other places. And we need mayors and we need other state officials definitely to step up and to highlight these things. And we need, I think you're right on another front, David, which is it has to be about our neighbors, and it can't be pointing fingers at those who voted for Trump and basically saying, you're going to suffer from this, good, because you're the one who brought it on. We have to strike a balance where we can educate people, many of whom had no idea what was going to happen here, and they don't follow what's going on, to understand what the cost is of these actions. And it's not an abstract cost, one that you and I and most of the people listening will relate to, which is the demise of democracy and the rise of tyranny. It is, government did this for you. You may not realize or have realized what it was that government was doing to help you, to protect you, to give you that safety net. But here now, look at what they've done, and you can see all of that. Today, just to pick one small example, they're denying National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, which is kind of our weather watchdog, the ability to interact with foreign equivalents, with other countries that have comparable weather watching and analyzing agents, as if weather is just in our country. So, what that's going to do is it's going to take away some of the early warning that we have for storms that are brewing, some of the ability to share data and analysis so that we can have a better handle on how to deal with violent storms, hurricanes, tornadoes, and the like. Uh, and that's going to affect all kinds of people, including in the deeply red states. We need to have the ability to highlight for people why what Trump, Musk, and the others are doing hurts them directly and why they need to rethink how they look at government and the parties.
Yeah. And again, if you mention Trump, if you mention Musk, if you say red, if you say blue, people immediately say this is a political statement.
Yeah.
If you say your house blew down, or burned down, and it was preventable, that's another issue. In a dark irony of all of this, almost a comic dark irony of all of this, we're already seeing one manifestation of this in the place that most Americans seem to care about most of all. I don't know if you're, an egg lover, Norm, but Americans
Yeah.
seem really, really concerned about the price of eggs.
Yeah.
And the last election, that was a big discussion. Well, guess what? In just the couple of weeks since Donald Trump took office, and certainly in the couple of months since he was elected, the price of eggs has skyrocketed. And in the past couple of weeks, one of the reasons is because we are stopping funding to fight things like avian flu. And avian flu, of course, kills birds and leads to culling of big chicken flocks. The price of eggs is right now average in the United States about $7.50 a dozen, which is twice what it was last year, because of these programs. And so, a lot of the time, people say all politics is local. Well, all politics is more than local. All politics is kitchen table. All politics is your neighbors. All politics is your block. And every one of these things has a human consequence. And I think it's super important that people focus on that, and move away from the rhetoric of the moment.
Yeah.
Anyway, where can people find this article you wrote?
It's at the Contrarian, which is this new site that was created by Jennifer Rubin, who left the Washington Post to protest to what Jeff Bezos and his hand-picked minion, Will Lewis, have done, and Norm Eisen, who has been in the forefront of resisting through the legal process many of these things. And so I've decided that I will contribute to them from time to time.
Well, they're lucky to have you. We had Norm and Jen on a couple weeks ago, right the 2 days after they launched
Yeah.
it. And a lot of the folks who are associated with us are also doing stuff there, and we encourage you
Yep.
to do that. I think their reach has very quickly become bigger than ours in some respects, but we're very happy with our, I don't know, million downloads a month, and we hope you'll tell your friends, and even that'll grow. But I would encourage you to go and read what Norm has written there. And each and every week, Norm and I will be here. One of the things we're going to try to do is periodically we'll bring people in from the Congress who are involved in these things, and we'll talk to them, or we'll bring people in from the states who are involved in these things, and we'll talk to them. But our focus is not going to be venting. It's not going to be hair on fire. It's not going to be your feelings. It's going to be, what can we do? And what can we practically do about this stuff? Because we're all in this together. That's why I'm so glad to be able to do this with you, Norm. So Good way to kick off the year. And that's why we're both so glad to be able to do this with all of you out there. And please join us every week for more of the DSR Words Matter podcast. Until then, thanks a lot. Bye-bye.